introduce Professor Piotr Kowzan. He is Associated Professor of the Department of Adult Education and Learning Institute of Education, University of Gdansk. His research is focused on social movements. He published several papers in international journals on the subject of learning in social movements. He is personally involved in the training of teachers and future teachers. And his paper has this title, Vite accelerate e rallentamento dei tempi formativi, riproduzione sociale dei movimenti ambientalisti giovanili dopo la pandemia. I'll try to translate it in English, but I think that it's quite difficult for me, so thank you.
Okay, I hope you hear me well. Good afternoon, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Yes, first of all, I need to apologize for the title. It meant that I spent too much time with books during the pandemia time. Okay, I have a presentation for you, so it will be much easier, I guess, to follow. So the title is complicated, but at least in one place you can see that it was optimistic because I wrote after the pandemic, and it's not that easy as we see. But with this title, what I meant is that paradoxically during the pandemia, some lives of some people, organizations and movements accelerated, so they had to mature much faster than usually. And on the other hand, so we as teachers, we have a very slow tool in our hands. It is education, which is supposed to be some work with people, in a limited space, and we should allow them to focus on something without being interfered with reality, with real problems. But anyway, let's go to the presentation as it is. And okay, maybe I will switch to another mode just to make it even larger. The goal of this presentation, as I thought, is to give you some insight into future challenges in order to find proper responses from the teacher's perspective. And actually, we may assume that more or less we know what will happen. I mean, I'm not an expert in earth science, but we may say that it is more or less as it's on the photo, presented by a parent for climate activists. And it means that we more or less know what will happen on Earth, but we don't really know the exact timeline. And during the timeline, we have we have to do something. We have our work, and we can influence reality, let's say. So, for today, what I planned, maybe it's a little bit much, but I tried to limit myself. First of all, I will say something about limitations of my knowledge, so and about sources where I get this knowledge about social movements from, and some general information about protesting children. Is it really something new to have children on the streets? And then we'll focus on Fridays for Future. I don't know if you heard, maybe most of you probably heard about this movement, run or led, at least at the beginning, by Greta Thunberg. Then I will present some research, some studies from social movement perspective. We will see what happened during the pandemic to this movement, and we will see from the educational perspective what could be done or what actually people learn during this activism or through this struggle. And well, and at the end I will try to present you some critical issues and some creative examples how to join or support people who are actually worried about the future. Okay, sources of my knowledge or limitations of my knowledge. I conducted research on protesting children, but not in the environmental movement, mostly on more younger children. I teach, as it was mentioned, and I also have some family experience. In protests, I have 3 children, and I would go to the protests and I observe them, and it's also very interesting feedback. When it comes to Fridays for Futures, for future, we have some research reports and research comments in international journals, but the limitation of this knowledge is that the scope of the research is focused on Europe. Even though we have a very diverse environment, social environment in Europe, so research results from Italy are a little bit different than those who come from Poland or Belgium, but still it's diverse, but we don't know what's going in Africa, and for example, Africa or Asia, and to solve this problem, we have I've analyzed some visuals, some photos to have some insight into other problems. And also we have websites, Facebook nowadays, and this is the very good place where activists discuss things and reveal what's inside, how they prepare for the struggles. Protesting children. Yeah. As teachers, maybe we could be a little bit outraged even to see children on the street, because it's a different type of democracy. Actually, children do not participate in our democracy, let's say, because they don't have voting rights, the majority of them, so they are on the margins of democracy. But from the legal point of view, we have a Declaration of Rights of the Child, and there it's stated that children have a right to peaceful protests, but peaceful protests only. Of course, they have several rights mentioned then, and there is always conflict between your right to voice, to be heard, and the right to, for example, the right to have a play, to have some fun, and a right to education. And this right, the right to education and the right to have a voice in public, are also conflicted in a way during school strikes. And we have many, let's say, many ways how children participate in the street protests. We could divide them on the protests where children are actually present during demonstrations, and in other ways where adults protest, but they mention that they do this instead of their children or in the name of their children. They write something about their children on the posters. And when it comes to active participation, sometimes we have really small children, and we call it participation by default, when children are together with their parents or guardians just because they had no choice, let's say. And we have active participation, and we will focus on that today. Active participation when they either fight for something because it's in their interest, or they even organize the struggle by themselves. And this is the case of Fridays for Future. And children participate anyway, even these are photos from Poland from 2 or 3 years. I collected them, even though in Poland it's not that easy to see children in the streets. They demonstrate against pollution, against several different causes. And it's more and more accepted publicly. But also there are some controversies, and it depends on the country, from country to country. The controversies can be connected to the content of the protest, as you can see on the slide. It could be kind of provoking, and also other controversies are connected to the issue that sometimes we have very small children preschool children protesting together with their teachers as well. But let's go to Fridays for Future to give you some broad description, at least for those who do not know the movement, but maybe some of you participate, so you have a very good insight as well. So on the slide we have calendar. We could assume that it started with Greta Thunberg, but it's not, you know, there are always some discussions about that. But the main thing is that it actually, Greta Thunberg, let's say, started during the election in Sweden. So it was kind of connected to the parliamentary elections in Sweden. And these protests are kind of, they get some attention when there is political, when there is voting as well in the background. And during the 2019, before pandemia, we had several coordinated protests, both international and global. In some of them, adults were invited with more attention, let's say. And these dots that we have on the left, close to some events, these are dots that mark events that we have some data, scientific or research surveys conducted during these events. So we know what happened, not only because we have media coverage, but more or less we know percentage or some details. But the surveys were conducted in more than 10 cities in Europe. And at the end, we have digital climate strike, so it's connected with pandemia. What is important, as you could find on the website of the, let's say, social movement, they very openly state that they have a distinct protest culture, and the first point is we use no violence during our demonstrations or in our mobilization. So it makes them legal, let's say. They have other values as well. To give you some visual insight, where protests took place, I know the maps are always, you know, lying to us, and here is also like the problem is that the blue icons are disproportionately big in regard to events, but we could assume that protests took place not only in capital cities, and they took place all around the world. But we have on the main website of the movement, we have only 2,356 registered events. But during single mobilizations, global mobilizations, we had more than 2,000 events. And on the other mobilizations, we had even 6,000 events. We know that because of the media coverage and because but not all events are registered. It means that nobody is controlling the movement in a way. It's a social movement as it is, and many of demonstrations are kind of spontaneous, probably. What do we know about this movement? The first thing that is kind of different from other movement is the gender difference. This is the majority of protesters are female, and almost all almost all leaders of this movement are female. So these are young women, well-educated, that are leading this protest. When they are asked about when young people are asked about the reason why they attend the protest, young people say they do it in their own interest. Adults say they do it because of the solidarity. The very difference, a big difference between this mobilization and others is the big portion of the newcomers, first-time participants. It means people who were never engaged in social movements or protests, or they don't have any links to NGOs and such things. So at the first mobilization in March, it was 38% of the first participants. It's significant because from other research we know that once people get some skills of organizing, protesting, and being in social movements, they will stay in social movements. Not maybe in this social movement, that they may migrate. They still have these skills, and we see in biographies of activists that the sooner they start, the more dense their experience can be. The limitation is that only, when I say youth, only people between 14 and 19 years old were, let's say, covered as youth, even though there were younger participants. For ethical reasons, they were not interviewed, but we don't know how big is this share of the people. Yes, on the bottom you have links to reports. Significant others. So what's the role of adults and what's the role of the teachers, and like how comes that young people are going to the streets? And the main thing was that more than one-third, not more than one-third of the participants were invited by their friends. So they were personally asked to go with me. Maybe somebody would say poke them, not in the internet, but in reality, and say, let's do it together. Teachers were significant, and they were also inviting children to participate. The same with parents, and actually the share of parents actively mobilizing their children is similar to teachers. And interestingly, also later protests, these parents were kind of invited by children as well. But you could realize it's kind of a proof that the Greta Thunberg effect really worked, because 45% say that it was an important factor, that they saw Greta Thunberg and they realized that even if you are young and small and whatever, you can influence the politics. They didn't know that maybe before. What's maybe a little bit surprising is the agenda of the movement. You can see that almost 60% say of people taking part in the survey said that actually they think that they could stop climate change by changing their lifestyles. Not only their own lifestyles, but changing the lifestyles of individuals. That's kind of surprising that they believe in it. But even more I would even say scary thing is that almost 80% of participants say that governments must act on what climate scientists say, even if the majority of people are opposed. At the beginning, you say it's rational, maybe, but when you look at it as this is what people that are kind of on the margins of our democracy because they don't have voting rights say they want to. It actually opens some space for the crisis of democracy, let's say. But maybe I will leave it for the discussion as well. This is about narrative. So it's another research conducted in Sweden, and also visuals were taken into the consideration. So it was kind of, people tried to analyze how was who to blame, who they blame, who protesters blame for the situation. And interestingly, it was, of course, humans, the system, politicians, and business. And humans, they blame themselves as well. I mean, the participants blame themselves as well for the situation that we are all in. Maybe even more interesting thing is that what needs to be done. And then we could see three main pillars, let's say. So there is something to do with individual and collective change. That's what they mentioned also in surveys. They expect individual and collective change. They expect some reforms, and in both these pillars, under both these pillars, they can go in details what needs to be done. But also they say much about systemic change, but that's maybe not, it's not only a slogan, but it doesn't have any details yet. So it's also a place for some thinking or utopian thinking or whatever. That's a place to make it more detailed vision. And when we look at the actual demonstrations, maybe when somebody is like social, maybe when somebody is focusing only on social science, it's not that striking as when you are a teacher. Because when you are a teacher, seeing people saying, for example, we are missing our lessons so we can teach you one, it's interesting that, you know, young people decided to, not only young, as we can see on this photo, but mostly young people went on strike. So they decided to give up learning, and they really want to teach others. Maybe it sounds like a threat, of course. They want to teach you a lesson, but from the perspective of a teacher, it looks like maybe it's a proper demonstration, you know, but as a teaching, it's not a very good way to teach somebody when you threat somebody, or I don't know, what do you think about that? I guess maybe it would be very interesting for me to see what do you think about the teaching skills of young activists, because it can also be some sort of fuel, or you could share your knowledge with young activists, or how to do something creative and different than usual. Because definitely we are not that successful in our movement. Okay, I now think it's our movement, so I'm really in. Yes, but I like social movements very much, so I feel like I'm an insider, even though I didn't participate. And what happened during the pandemic? As I've mentioned, some scholars say that we actually experienced, even though everything slowed down, we experienced some sort of acceleration of reality. But effectively, the sanitary regimes look like repressions for children. They've lost, and students, they've lost the place, they've lost their schools. So, I mean, the building, actually, the place where they could poke one another and ask them to participate into a demonstration. They were engaged in some sort of peer education, informal education. They share something, and right now they're kind of isolated in a way. So they've lost their colleagues, the contact with their colleagues to some extent, and they started to be dependent on the family. When they moved to the internet, it was announced that digital strike, let's start a digital strike globally. So they experienced cyberbullying, and for example, in India, they even experienced the state censorship. Their websites were suspended. now something reminded me that I need to slow down a little bit because of the translation. I'm sorry for that. What happened? They started in some countries. They started to do some activist thing, to do some protests in small groups, during the local actions, and there were some cases when they experienced really violence, in the Polish case, I would maybe talk a little bit more about that. They even experienced sexual harassment when they went among people with the message. Another problem for the movement was that the ecological issues were not that fancy anymore, let's say, because media had another story, and the story about pandemic thing. So, and the strategic problem was that public transport, when many activists relied on that, saying that we need to leave cars and go by public transport instead. Right now, people start to be afraid of public transport, where you could become infected. So some solutions, some reformist solutions, were kind of gone, actually, at least in the consciousness of activists. And still, we are wasting time in a way. Like when we think about minuses of the pandemic times. But there were also some advantages of this situation, because at the beginning, at least, people realized that we can change the world even within weeks. Like we can switch things and they work differently. Maybe not in the way that we would like to, but many political dogmas disappear. So, on the other hand, we could say that this movement, Fridays for Future, were at the beginning of the decline at the end of 2019. People were feeling burnout. They didn't really felt the success. Like the mobilization were bigger and bigger, and the results were kind of limited. So from the burnout and frustration, many young people become engaged in some local neighborhood actions of solidarity. So actually they were making some very important networks, but really in the local spaces. And the other thing was that the content production went very high, because suddenly there was a time to upload some videos. The movement had some time for reflection, but it was actually gathered by intellectuals, let's say. So the most influential people had their voice listened. And actually during this pandemic times, children started growing up. So many of them won't go back to the same place as they left. So even though they were kind of organized in their classes or in their schools, when they change the schools and when they leave their classes, it will be more difficult to organize again. What I forgot to mention actually is that when I said something about gender, that we have this very female movement, I forgot to say that it's really very educated movement. So the majority of participants, both young and adult, are involved in education. They have parents with university degrees, and adults who participate in the movement have university degrees very often as well. So this movement is kind of elite movement. These are potentially the best students in your class. So it's interesting how they will march through institutions, as I could mention, as I could say. Okay. Young activists get older, as I said. And what is important when you get older and when your movement is in decline is your allies. If the movement has allies, then they can borrow the tactics, then they could find the place where they could be involved even more. So I tried to make a list of allies. I'm sorry. Maybe some of you know, you've heard or participated, but maybe something is missing. The most active websites that I found are websites of Parents for Future. Actually, parents support their children, and they're really afraid of that and so of the future. Also, we have Scientists for Future. Maybe not that active, but this movement is really connected with science. We have XR, it means Extinction Rebellion, and this is very important strategic ally of the youth, because they focused on non-violent strategy. So they don't want to use violence, even though they say that the cause is really important. So it kind of it keeps the youth within this non-violent attitude. Also, we have a Greenpeace and Client Earth, so it means these are some, not movements, but organizations. And Client Earth is an organization of the lawyers. And what we could say that in social movements, you don't have clear membership. So even though maybe you participate in some demonstration or you went on the street, it doesn't mean that you feel the part of the Fridays for Future movement, for example, or Parents for Future. You could feel that you are part of it, but you can easily leave. So there are no, in this movement, there are no leaders, and no leaders like official leaders, and no membership. It looks different in NGOs and such as Greenpeace, or in groups where your education is important, like Client Earth, when you're actually employed to do something. And on the photos you have young people, but actually with the signs of Extinction Rebellion here, and they tried to dress nicely because they went to the ministry to give the petition. And on the poster you have who teaches whom. So they feel awkward in this position of being a teacher, essentially. Creativity during the pandemic. We expected that, but you never know because yes.
Scusi, possiamo magari interrompere la relazione perché vedo che le domande sono tantissime, quindi pregherei di dare una risposta a qualcuna di queste domande e poi dopo magari concludere la relazione. Grazie.
Okay, thank you, Professor. A lot of questions. So first one, Leica asks, why mostly females are participants in Friday for Future? What do you think about this?
Probably, like the main issue was that the Greta Thunberg was the influential figure, and maybe young men do not identify with her as much. It doesn't mean that they don't identify with her, because it's only majority, not only female movement. So it's good to remember that there are men inside. But the problem is also that young boys maybe identify with other issues, or even like men have more opportunities to be engaged in politics, maybe. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe. And this is probably also another reason is that this is the result of the growing feminist movement, which is probably the biggest right now movement on the globe, and it has something in common here. So girls or young women are changing in a way. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perhaps your answer concerns the second question. Is climate change the only theme where students are going on strike for, or are there more themes that they find important?
In this movement, not only climate change is important in Europe, but for example, in India, the main issue is air pollution. So it's there are some shades, let's say, there are some grades of this change. But when I say that when you learn some skills, you can apply them differently. I've heard about some digital strike of students in Denmark. I don't remember the name of the city, probably Aarhus, where students were refused, they were refused their school to be open after during the pandemia, but they really missed each other, so they striked and they refused to take part in digital lessons. So eventually something had to be open. So when they acquire this strategy or tactics, let's say, they can use it in different areas.
Okay, thank you. And La Salete asks, I have often a discussion with teachers about if we should help the students mobilize for these events, or if we should wait for them to mobilize themselves and then support them. If we give them a push, would we put at risk the value of the action? What is your opinion about this?
Actually, that's the other part of my presentation.
Okay.
So
good.
Yes, I'm concerned with this. It's important. Like, it doesn't really matter if you push them or if you ignore the movement. The important thing is, like, it's difficult to ignore, but if it exists. But if it doesn't, and you think what to do, and if you ignore it, it's also okay. The most important probably thing is to be with them. If they are afraid or if they want to talk about things, you are the first, or not the first, but a very important adult, and also a kind of transmitter between common knowledge and scientific knowledge. So the school can be a place where they can understand things better. So the school, even if it's not a hub for activists, it can have its own role in their life.
Okay, thank you. Anna, hai le altre domande?
Okay, a question from Robin, which is similar, but it regards the adults more in general. So it's how do young people feel they are received by adults when they engage in activism? Is it a case from them being considered as active social agents in the world by adults, or more of a nuisance or threat to law and order?
It depends. We don't have, like, from the scientific point of view, we don't have that much data on it. We have something about the emotions during separate events, but we don't really know how it's changing in the meantime. Because during the demonstration, if you attended a demonstration, a very good demonstration, you probably feel really in a good shape, because you see that your worries you are not alone with your thoughts, your emotions, you are thousands. Yeah? So definitely the demonstrations have some kind of therapeutic effect. But we don't know what happens next when you, for example, in the evening when you watch media coverage, and then you realize your story, your enthusiasm, your engagement was kind of sold for something, or you know, somebody even didn't mention, or the comment of somebody is worth more than your, I don't know, a week or a month of activism. So it depends, but it is when you expose yourself physically, bodily on the streets, you are vulnerable, and yeah, you can feel that you can change the world, but at the same time you feel more. But that's maybe it's more pedagogic, from the pedagogical experience and from the experience of me as activist with my own children as well, that such things can happen. I don't know if I answered your questions, but I definitely, I can only complicate things here. Mm-hmm.
And there was a question from Katia, which was like a little bit of a summary of the two previous questions, which was, what about a possible positive relation between adults and teachers and young people to modify and to arrive to a compromise, to modify the common, sorry, because it's in Italian, so
Mm-hmm.
the common well-being for the whole community, like,
Mm-hmm.
can we arrive to a compromise?
Sometimes the problem is that sometimes both parents and their children and the adults that are at school, I mean teachers, are in a way that are not in the position of power to change things. Yes, we can say that maybe we can change few things, but it's very difficult to change, to have a systemic change, or I can't imagine the scale of demonstration that the demonstration would have to be in order to put everything on the right track. Like there are some scientists who say like that we should give up this optimist view that we can mitigate the results of the climate change, and it's better together to prepare for adapt to something that is really unadaptable. And this is the movement of another movement, some kind of more spiritual, and even though it's from the science, from actually from the sustainable development studies, and they call it deep adaptation. And probably maybe it's not a solution, but for those who have children, it's good to keep this relation with nature, which is like that allows us to have some joy with the nature, not to let's see how to say. No, I have to skip it here. So if you want to see, like, look into the deep adaptation movement, there will be some spiritual solutions, but I think as for social movements, it will be difficult to proceed this change with adults, parents, and children even together. I'm not an optimist, and I don't see any model that in the past that would provoke such change. The model that is Extinction Rebellion based on, because they have some scientific data saying that it's enough to change 3.5% of the population in order to produce global, not global, but a huge change in the country, is based not on the democratic countries. It's based on dictatorships, and so the data is from the dictatorship. It's not based on the US, UK, and European, like more modern, let's say, liberal democracies. So we actually don't know if this model is true and if this model is feasible. But Extinction Rebellion, they believe that 3.5% is enough to produce this such change. So the number.
Okay, a very specific question from Teresa. Do you consider that anticipating the age of voting is a possible consequence of these youngest activist movements?
The age of voting, probably I don't know if they believe, but if they have voting rights earlier, they would be probably disillusioned earlier. So maybe this kind of, because in data we see a huge difference in the level of hopefulness. So they are rather hopeful, like these young participants. They feel that it's possible to bring change. And actually in, I don't remember, but probably in Italy and Poland, it was even more people believed that companies and businesses simply changed their behavior because they will be simply pushed or asked to change. So they are not cynical, not yet. But I don't know if it's connected with the voting age. But something is in the. Maybe also they are listened because we can't say to them, go and vote, as we could say to adults. Politicians can't say to them that go and vote and you will see, because there is no such path for them. You have to listen to them. So also it's their power.
Io chiederei di, non perché non siano importanti, ma magari chiederei di concludere al professore la relazione, poi eventualmente recuperiamo queste domande in ultima battuta, in modo tale che possiamo non perdere, diciamo, il filo del discorso avviato con le slide che vediamo ancora condivise.
Ok, quindi le prossime domande alla fine.
Grazie.
Okay, so I can present something more, a little bit more. Yes, I understood correctly. Because
yes, you can go on, and
okay,
after that we are
proceed.
going to give
Great,
you the other questions.
Great. So creativity, legal actions, as I mentioned, that there are some lawyers involved. Should protest when they try to organize protests, without body being present, but only posters.
Un attimo, scusi professore, scusi.
Okay. Scusa, ho necessità di fare il cambio con la collega.
There is a change.
Ho fatto il cambio, in effetti adesso dovrebbe attivare Elisabetta.
Okay, no, I understand.
The translation, okay.
Sorry,
now
I needed a change in
Thank
translation. You can go on now. Thank you.
So, now it's about creativity during the pandemic. It's good to see what people actually invented, because it means that the movement is still kind of vivid, or at least intellectually. Shoe strike means that only shoes are gathered, and posters. Legal actions, young people try to sue countries, they try to make some petitions as well, they try to use the legal ways to influence countries. As I mentioned before, this is the kind of well-educated movement, so maybe it's very easy, not very easy, but the easy way for them. Another creative thing is to organize only posters protesting. Some activists organize they started projecting images of protesting crowds, but it's only for media, I guess, because streets are were empty, and many people were kind of integrating at home. Some were lucky and had families with the same attitude or equally involved, and then we had that's why probably the family, the parents for future were so active during the pandemic. And when it comes to interventions, in some countries during the pandemic times, there were some elections. I have some examples from Poland. This is the example, maybe it's not that visible, but this is the political rally. And in the background, you could see young activists with posters saying climate. What about climate? And the question mark. But they were also going to some political rallies, and some young women were sexually harassed. We saw also some videos from other cities where older people, some sort of supporters of some candidates were really aggressive towards young people with climate issues. The posters were destroyed, and it went several times. So I don't want to, like, maybe it's marginal in the global context, but it's good to remember that people can be traumatized during their activism in many different ways. Okay, is there anything educational left after school strikes? And I tried to collect everything I know, and it's not much, but basically the educational thing is what people learn, if they are learning during this process. And the funny thing is that they learn to be rude, and they really learn to, be a troublemaker, which is funny because when we relate it to the thing that we have the best students in the class protesting, they started communicating globally. They started relating one experience to another to build a common ground for some protest. Maybe it's not for everybody, but to some extent, people, sometimes it's enough when you upload a photo and somebody from another country, another region, another continent likes it or comment it, and it's starting, it can start some relation and communication. People, the important thing is that they can and they feel the need to read research results, which is not that easy. And the art was also important for them, because expressing yourself clearly and nicely, and there's a sort of artistic skill as well. Thinking in terms of we, it can help in what it can help. It's important in general. Systems literacy, it means that they see how things are connected to each other. They learn a lot about media, especially about media coverage of their own, sometimes of their own words, how they are put into the context. The important thing is also leaving the zone of convenience, going to the street, not being afraid, talk to strangers, talk to people who are not on your Facebook, among your Facebook friends. And the practice, when you are really involved in some practice, is also important. That's why I think they will be really interested, or some of them could be interested in the ways of, in your teaching skills, actually your teaching skills, because they actually went to the streets to teach. It's kind of amazing. And I like I conduct some sort of exercise with my students, and I do it very often. I collect such photos like this from Australia, and we try to divide posters or the messages on those which say something with the emotions of hatred, disgust, and the others that kind of say things that kind of are, they are proof that we are involved in something. And I collected for you something, some hate, like some that I would link to the hatred thing, like coal is cancer, stop climate change, no time to waste, oil spills are forever, ban something or something, I don't even see. These are kind of, you know, political strong messages. And on the other hand, we have some, I love a sun-powered country. I love clean energy and I can't vote yet. You know? But these are the messages that I'm involved. I'm really into something. You know, this is like, we could divide these posters on those who are more in politics and those who are more into education, because in education we need actually these people or this sort of being in love with subject, being like curious about what to do with this topic. And I think it's fruitful to use these such engagement and to inspire such engagement as well. And to explain something about teachers and the role of teachers, I like the quote from Greta Thunberg. She said, "My teachers are divided. As people, they think what I'm doing is good, but as teachers, they say I should stop." So it's kind of weird. I know it's her words and it's her point of view, but it is some sort of split between morality and ethics. Like, and I would maybe recommend, maybe it's a wrong word, but I mentioned this about being in love of education, being in love of some topics. And I'm inspired here by post-critical approach in pedagogy, when they actually mention that the education, this is kind of another attitude. These people try to defend education for the education's sake, not education for employability, not education for the, I don't know, sustainable growth or whatever, not education for something, but education for education as it is. It looks a little bit conservative sometimes because they want to, they articulate that education starts when you think that it would be good to preserve something, but not in a conservative way to give power to this issue, but to share your love in some sort of some issue, to put it on the table and to watch together, or to exercise this subject. And you need to keep some sort of openness, because the young generation can use what you share with them in a totally different way. But basically, the education is the attitude of generosity is important. You need to be generous towards new generation in order to inspire them to present something that you really care about. And maybe it's hidden in, maybe it's little, this quote is a little bit too theoretical for some of you, but it inspires me because it gives some another way between the problem of going out or staying in the school, how we should relate to one another when our children or our students want to go to the streets and they just give the education up and they say it's worthless. Actually, they say because in this context of climate catastrophe, it looks not enough for them, at least not enough. So this attitude of generosity and and focusing on what you really love in the world is kind of opening, or at least you can be sincere in that. But what about activist expectations? What teachers? We can find them on the website Fridays for Future, and it's written simply here how teachers can help. And there's not much discuss the climate crisis, do some presentation, educate, but presentation to teachers. Yes, you can ask permissions to bring, like the three last things are kind of activist things. The second one is to educate, to discuss with your teachers, with your friends, actually, or with unions. This is the way we also can relate to teacher unions. This is also the way we can relate to the student strike. And only the first point is kind of education. Critical issues. Critical issues. It's visible, and we can read it also in some. There are some research on that. The whole situation about climate change is a huge burden for the youth. This consciousness of when you know what is going to be sooner or later, you can have some psychological issues. That's why I've mentioned this deep adaptation approach, because going on strike or protest is not the everyday thing. In the meantime, you need to keep healthy yourself, and start to relate to forest or nature in a way that it's not grieving all the time, being aggrieved. Communication beyond the tribe, it's something really new, or maybe we are not that aware that the simple talking to each other is so difficult in the age of social media. Talk dangerously means talking outside of your tribe, talking to the people that you don't know, or that they have totally different opinion. Because talking to people who are on your side is kind of, yeah, it's interesting and nice, but we need to be really, or they need to be really efficient if they want to change the world. And the important problem is, will the end justify the means at some point? There is a temptation of violence on many sides. The one side is that if the movement, such as Fridays for Future or the Allies, will grow enough, there will be police violence, and we need to kind of deal with it or prepare for that. On the other hand, we have the temptation of being violent against people who are the decision makers, or being violent against property, as often happens in some sort of anti-capitalist approach, let's say. So right now there are non-violent organization movement with allies who are also non-violent, but how far they can go if they see where they are, let's say. And future forms of protests, it would be good to mention. I would maybe, it depends on your creativity, and it's enough to ask young activists, they definitely find some ways. But I would like to mention the problem of introverts, because if you attended any demonstration in your lifetime, it's noisy, it's extremely noisy. And sometimes, it's, maybe for many of us, it's interesting and it gives you some sort of power, but many people are left with no energy after such events. And even on the internet, in other social movements, people are bringing this issue of introverts, that they probably have some different tactics. They are very efficient with with their attitude towards others. So they don't shout when they need to deliver a message. They act differently, totally differently. And some other things are the bells for future. This is mentioned on the website. Bells for future means wherever you can find the bell in the building, just ring it. So this is the new sort of, but also it's a noise, let's say. And when we look at the calendar, at September 25, we can expect something to see, because there is a global day for climate action, and they announced that it will be adjusted to the COVID issues. So probably we will see some variety of actions, also not on the national level, but international level, because the sanitary regimes are different, and these activities will be different as well. I leave you with some sort of literature here, and actually that's the end of the story. I hope I satisfy you at least to some point. When I want to, the most important things, no, I don't want to actually summarize the whole presentation, because I guess I'm actually curious what you will think about it, and I'm curious about your experience and how we can be smarter together. Yes, so that's everything from my side. Thank you.
Grazie professor Kowzan. Direi di rispondere ad almeno alcune domande che sono state poste nella chat, contenendo però le risposte entro il limite, diciamo, delle 16:30, in modo tale che poi dopo possiamo avere il tempo per approfondire ulteriormente questi stimoli nei gruppi, come abbiamo fatto stamattina. Il format è lo stesso, e avere soprattutto il tempo per ritornare nell'aula principale per poterci confrontare nuovamente con il professor Kowzan e restituire quelle che sono le nostre riflessioni maturate all'interno dei gruppi. Quindi chiedo...
Scusa Katia, se parli in italiano devi dare il tempo alla traduttrice di tradurti per...
Scusate.
Perché non c'è la traduzione inglese attivata.
Quindi ripeto tutto?
No, non so se c'è bisogno per la traduzione di Ilaria. Poi puoi fare quello che ha detto Katia.
Sì, lo faccio qui?
Sì, direttamente, tanto.
Okay, so basically we will have a brief question and answer session till 4:30, after which you will be divided into working groups as it happened in the morning. So basically that is the main issue. Prego. Ho fatto un breve riassunto di quello che è stato
Silvia,
detto,
che
sì.
fai? Anna?
Ok, vado io. So from Sarah, it was the previous question, and which can be the main tools to give voice to young people and children in order to take them seriously in the political dimension? And which are the main teaching methodologies to the social transformation through the global education?
The first part of the question, actually, I guess we don't know, because everything that we saw, it's not working. So like, that's why social movements are always so creative, because they try to push the limits a little bit harder, because everything that they achieved is not enough. When it comes, so I don't know, it probably won't satisfy you, but much depends on what people are agree on. I mean, you can't do many efficient efficient actions with people who are not prepared for that. And when I say something about the police violence as well, or the possibility of violence, it means that it would be good if young people are kind of trained in order to sustain the provocation or some violent actions. And being non-violent is extremely hard. Seeing your friends, your close friends, being bitten sometimes, or being subjected to the police, let's say, scrutiny is not that easy to sustain. So they should be, whatever you, it's better to discuss before what people agree to do. Yes, maybe, I don't know if I answered this part of the question, but when it comes to theoretical approaches, I've lost, I'm sorry, I've lost the second part about the global education and
yeah, it was, which are the main teaching methodologies to the social transformation through the global education?
Teaching methodology transformation. Actually, well, I can't answer this question like straightforwardly, but I don't know if I answer you like the best, like my approach that I apply at the university is a critical approach. That's why I was kind of inspired by a post-critical approach, because in the critical approach we simply try to, especially in the critical place pedagogy, we try to find what's worth to how the place that we live in is kind of colonized or destroyed, and then we try to rehabilitate this place and rebuild what's actually worth or valuable for us. So that's why this critical approach for me is a kind of matrix that I use also in the global education. But I don't know if it's on the university level it works, but on other levels maybe it needs to be translated into some less theoretical issues, I guess. I don't know.
Okay. Is there any common strategy of Fridays for Future movement and their allies to make the effect of the partnership stronger?
Actually, on the side of the youth, they don't have to care about the partnership, because now the movement of Fridays for Future is the source of newcomers, the source of activists. So it's the allies that build these ties with the movement, because we know that from the past, from the history, that these allies their organizations, whoever is close to the activists will benefit from the activism. It will benefit because they will get some new, engaged, and well-educated like people working on their side. So from the parents' perspective, it's kind of easy because it's enough to be with your children. Easy. And from the other perspective is to be visible, to be present in schools. I don't know what else they could do. And that's an interesting question, because we perceive organizations as allies, but why they became allies and how they do it, like how they really do this being together, I really don't know. Coalition is the political tool. Building a coalition, organizing events together, discussing together with leaders of the movement is common attitude.
Okay, there was a question which was also about the allies, and it's from Harry, and he says that in Holland, right-wing politicians are saying that teachers are indoctrinating the students. So it's kind of an alliance between teachers and students against the political power.
Yeah, it's the common, it's like we can expect such things. We also like I can expect like whenever we see children protesting, it's always somebody raising the problem of manipulation. But nowadays, when we see that, we could say that there are no adults. If an adult is in social media, it means that probably he or she is indoctrinated and manipulated. And if it's not in social media, then it is, or he is uninformed. When it comes to teachers at school, there are no other way to defend probably as like effectively defend your interests, your point of view is by or through teacher unions, because being alone in front of the politician is a lost struggle, because they have, you know, that's their job to win actually such quarrels. So defend through teacher unions.
Okay, for now we have no further questions. I don't know if someone wants to say something. We still have, I guess, very few minutes, so maybe one intervention more, if there is one. Otherwise, questions.
Ricordo anche, però, chiedo poi di tradurre Ilaria, ricordo che il professore rimane con noi anche dopo i lavori di gruppo, quindi
sì, esatto,
potrà trarre delle conclusioni e sarà possibile ancora fare interventi e domande dopo i lavori di gruppo, mentre invece stamattina non era possibile. Quindi se siete d'accordo, secondo me potremmo procedere e approfondire nei gruppi, così poi discutiamo col professore dopo. Prego, la traduzione.
introduco.
Scusa, Katia, facciamo tradurre solo.
Yes, I remind you that Professor Piotr Kowzan will be with us also after the working groups. So maybe now we can just move to the working groups and we can make some further questions and other comments on all these issues after the working groups.
Bene, io mi limito a introdurre i coordinatori dei vari gruppi, sempre 2 gruppi in inglese e 4 gruppi in italiano. Il primo gruppo in inglese sarà coordinato da Dobrawa Alexia, il secondo da Massimiliano Lepratti e quelli in italiano da Raffaella De Luca, Giovanna Cipollari, Fabrizio Leone, Lucia Simi. E quindi direi che ci ritroviamo qui all'incirca verso le 17:20, qualche minuto prima possibilmente, 17:15, con il report 5 minuti di ogni gruppo. E poi il professore ci aiuterà a chiudere questo pomeriggio.
Ilaria traduce.
Okay, I don't have the names for the different groups anyway, as in the morning we will have 2 groups in English and other 4 groups in Italian. You will be discussing in groups up till 5:15 or thereabouts. Then we join together the main room, and together with Professor we will draw up the conclusions.
Come stamattina io avvio le aule, non è stato facile riconoscere i nomi di tutti. Se qualcuno non si ritrova rimane nell'aula principale e lo spostiamo successivamente. Molte persone sono entrate in ritardo e quindi non sono entrate nei gruppi costituiti, le aggiungeremo.
So as this morning, the rooms are already created. If you have any troubles or you are in the wrong room, just get out and raise your hand, so then we will put you in the right room. Some of you accessed a bit later, so they are not included in the rooms. So please just wait a bit that we will include you in the rooms.
Bene, buon lavoro a tutti quanti.
Buon
See
lavoro.
you later.
La cortesia a Dobrała Aleksiak o a chi per lei di riferirci quello che è accaduto all'interno del gruppo e quelli che sono gli argomenti, le questioni che sono emerse.
Solo una nota, scusate, sono attive le traduzioni simultanee sia in italiano dall'inglese e poi viceversa quando ci saranno le relazioni italiane in inglese. Vi ricordo di selezionare inglese se volete sentire la lingua inglese, spagnolo se volete sentire la lingua italiana.
Dobrała, ci sei? Sì? Non hai il microfono? Ok.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't turn on the translation. Should I report now? That's my...
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Okay, so...
You have 5 minutes, please.
5 minutes. I will try to be quick. Our debate was very interesting. We shared a lot of good practice. I will maybe start with what was the most inspiring. What we started is the Greta's quotation about the inconsistency or the discrepancies between a teacher and being a human. What are our roles in this? And also, if being a human pushes us to help the children, to the youth to organize climate strikes or help them somehow, that we might do too much for them, that we might take over. So there are lots of issues that we could think of in like being teacher, human, and helping youth or being there for youth or supporting. What is our role? That was what started off our discussion. Later we discussed a bit, that's what Professor Piotr inspired us to talk about how do teachers feel about educating their best students, the core students, when they give up on education and go on strikes. Is that how do teachers feel if they, for example, like losing faith in knowledge? So we discussed that not all the learning happens in class. So the students that participate in strikes, they still learn a lot, and that the people that discussed this topic, they said that they would support the students a lot, and our group said that we should all be engaged, but not too much in the strikes, and that activism is an important process. It's not only the strike itself, but also preparation, communication, after that, for example, contact with media. So all of it is a process, and it was called a full class. So teachers were not very upset that that students leave class. They were more optimistic, and they said that it could be a really good learning process for the students. Also, there were some doubts about, for example, treating Fridays for Future as a day off. That was the one concern, that some students just took the day off to go to strike, but really didn't participate. Okay, we also talked a little bit about if the students are the ones that should teach the adults. There was a quote on Professor Piotr's presentation, like, who teaches whom, or we are missing our lessons, so we can teach you. We talked about it, and we believe that students can learn and teach at the same time, that it's an opportunity for new dynamics, and that this is like two complementary parts. But we shouldn't forget in that topic that students or youth shouldn't have too much responsibility, that adults are off the hook. That shouldn't be the case, that the children have too much responsibility, because what was also mentioned during our discussion is that the students are more and more worried. There was we mentioned the concern about mental health issues, or climate anxiety. So we also spoke about support, how the teachers can support students. And one of the support that was mentioned was also psychological support, to feel solidarity, but also the solidarity in this pain, or in the anxiety. When it comes to support, the teachers also, we also discussed in a group that now, because of pandemic, it's difficult to be in touch with students, and students miss interaction. So what we can do to support is share online materials, or share, for example, more information that is positive. Some good things that are happening, because as I mentioned before, we've discussed also about mental health issues. So the emphasis on showing the positive practice, the good practice, something that is what adults are doing for the world that is actually good, not only the negative examples. Also, what was mentioned when we spoke about what teachers can do is that there's this tension between political and behavioral action. Politics are like big meta level, but behavioral are very, very ours. We can show, the teacher's role is to present the solution. We can show behavioral solution, for example, how we act, as we can be role models. Also, we discussed that teachers should involve climate change in lots of subjects, and that training on climate change should be obligatory for everybody, not only the engaged teachers, because engaged teachers will appear on more and more courses, but the teachers that need the knowledge might avoid it. So it would be good to have some mandatory trainings. In the end, we discussed a bit about this message when Professor Piotr showed the posters about the love and hate message. We discussed a bit that there is a mixture of messages, that there are different ones, but also what was mentioned in the very end, but it was unfortunately interrupted because it became very interesting, is that the students that are on climate strikes are the minority. They're the good students that are, as mentioned also during the presentation, extroverts, that have people skills, that don't suffer from any disabilities usually. So there are also many students that are excluded from this type of activity, that as I think it was also raised by Professor Piotr, we should find a way, or help support finding the way for the students that are excluded from this group, that can't take really part in climate strikes. So I think that's it, that's the summary.
Bene, io ti ringrazio, devo passare la parola a Massimiliano soltanto per ragioni di tempo, non perché l'intervento non fosse interessante, anzi. Grazie Massimiliano.
Thank you to everybody. I can share something.
Yes, you can.
Okay. Okay. Can you see the Word document? Okay. Okay. Yes, I have followed the list that Dobrava has shared with me, because she knows very well Professor Piotr, so it was easier for me to follow that. And we have the first question for the discussion. How do the teachers feel about educating and teaching when their best students, the core of the strike movements, give up formal education by striking because they think that knowledge alone does not change anything? Oh, many answers. I try to summarize. It's something, striking activism is something additional, not against the learning, so it's positive. It's important that students take action in general, because so nothing against that. Oh, and activism is a bridge between formal education and real life. This is one reason why it's so attractive. And it's also interesting to see that if students make change locally, they understand it's possible to do that globally. It's a way to develop their skills to be activists. Of a more general consideration that the attitude of the teacher depends on their personal and professional background. They could be conservative or progressist from a political point of view, and they could be more public, feel themselves more public servants or more citizens, and that can conditions, of course, their point of view about that. Yes, and teachers also learn from this process, learn what is more important for the students, and they can improve their way to teach. This is the first. The second, sorry, I'm very quick, but I hope to be in the 5 minutes. How in your countries can you try to support students in your work, and how you can support them? I just show one answer. Showing some individual action could be an example, because sometimes the students don't find a solution because of their complexity. So an example, for example, recycling or something like that, could be helpful for the students. And another possibility, a teacher can show other experience in the world to make the students more aware of the problems. I pass to the third one. Students say they want help to teach about climate change. Can the students do it better, for example, through strikes, etc.? We have some suggestion. Students can invite representative of different institutions to be that can listen to students. It's a form of students lobbying. Students can talk, of course, about climate and something like that to their families and parents, or can invite people from their community to present some work. It's also that is interesting. Friday for Future activists could be invited for teacher education. This is an experience from Austria. It's important to see the activists as experts, also as a form of democracy. Not only scientists are the teachers, but also the activists could do that. And in general, it's important the interaction between protest and knowledge, and the activists use content based on scientific knowledge. Very quickly, the last two ones. Messages full of love and messages full of hate. They change with the age. Small children are full of energy and enthusiasm. Teens discover the system does not work and are more rebel, and so the messages change. And number 5, how can this content presentation, the one from Professor Piotr, be useful for the teachers in their teaching practice? The answer, it was important. It's important for sharing experience and feel not alone. That's all.
Bene, grazie per la sintesi. E adesso la volta del gruppo di Raffaella De Luca, che non vedo. Raffaella?
Eccomi.
Eccoti.
È possibile condividere lo schermo?
Sì, certo.
Sì, la condivisione è abilitata, devi solo cliccare su Share Screen o condividere schermo.
Ok, facciamo... forse... dunque, alcune osservazioni emerse nel nostro gruppo riguardano il fatto che i ragazzi sembrano attivi su quelle che sono le questioni globali e a volte invece sembrano più resistenti in classe rispetto alle proposte degli insegnanti quando si tratta di scelte molto personali che li toccano da vicino, e quindi è emerso che forse in questo passaggio dall'ideale alla scelta personale c'è uno spazio educativo che si apre per gli insegnanti per stimolare la riflessione su la connessione, no, tra ciò che si esprime, si comunica e ciò che si fa. È stato molto come dire, importante la sottolineatura dell'intervento formativo su l'esercizio della violenza, e cioè del fatto che anche gli educatori e gli insegnanti a volte non pensano anche a questa componente a cui si espongono i giovani attivisti. Mentre dall'altra parte è uno stimolo molto forte e positivo la sottolineatura che abbiamo avuto oggi sul fatto che c'è una forte leadership femminile nel movimento degli attivisti e che Greta, pur essendo una ragazza appunto che noi avremmo potuto categorizzare come una persona con una disabilità, con dei limiti, è in realtà diventata una protagonista. E questo è uno stimolo per gli insegnanti a interrogarsi sempre sulle sorprese e valorizzare tutte le differenze che sono presenti in classe. Per quanto riguarda invece
Scusa Raffaella, riesci a metterlo in modalità presentazione così vediamo meglio?
Assolutamente sì. Va meglio?
Grazie.
Sì, io raccomando, ecco, il rispetto dei tempi.
Allora, che i giovani e gli studenti hanno il diritto di far sentire la propria voce e hanno espresso una protesta pacifica. Questi sono tutti elementi positivi e abbiamo richiamato questa osservazione fatta, diciamo, guardando all'interno sul passaggio da frustrazione a solidarietà come un elemento positivo di crescita del movimento. Molto importante anche questa educazione fra pari, cioè questa trasmissione di conoscenze e incoraggiamento reciproco all'interno dei gruppi. C'è stata anche l'osservazione della differenza fra la consapevolezza di questa generazione e questo genere di consapevolezza e di decisione che potevano avere la generazione degli insegnanti alla loro età. un'attenzione al fatto che l'attivismo chiama in causa gli insegnanti sullo spazio per offrire opportunità di apprendimento, di formarsi, anche a reagire sulla gestione che spesso nella comunicazione di massa viene fatta a denigrare gli attivisti. Un altro, come dire, osservazione, un altro contributo è sempre sottolineando la capacità di questi movimenti di dare il valore aggiunto della componente femminile e il fatto che giovani donne istruite provenienti da varie parti del mondo simboleggia che c'è già in atto un fenomeno di grande senso di responsabilità e un cammino di consapevolezza che deve continuare e quindi deve essere sostenuto. E la cittadinanza attiva è un percorso purtroppo lungo e consapevole che necessita di un approccio critico, e quindi in questo c'è lo spazio per gli insegnanti a cui è richiesto di credere nelle educabilità all'infinito, no? Quindi nella fiducia del proprio ruolo di insegnanti. Infine vi citiamo alcune esperienze all'interno di un paio di scuole come esperienze di formazione fra pari, non necessariamente sul tema dei cambiamenti climatici, ma per esempio sull'uso dei media, quindi con dando l'opportunità agli studenti, o almeno a un gruppo di essi, di farsi una formazione un pochino più approfondita e diventare dei peer educator verso gli altri. Lasciando poi anche agli insegnanti la libertà di essere chiari, espliciti rispetto alle posizioni che acquisiscono.
Mi
Raffaella,
dispiace,
il microfono è
Raffaella
chiuso.
non ha più il microfono.
Il microfono è chiuso.
Raffaella?
Devi riaprire il microfono, Raffaella. Vediamo se riesco a farlo io. È un segno del destino.
Non si sente. Eccoti.
Ecco, adesso
No,
vorrei verificare.
mi si era proprio bloccato lo schermo, vi chiedo scusa. Dicevo appunto anche, richiamando anche il lavoro, le riflessioni di un altro gruppo, il fatto che gli insegnanti hanno diciamo anche il diritto e il dovere di prendere delle posizioni, no? e di essere trasparenti, avere un rapporto trasparente con gli studenti. Infine appunto questa idea già sperimentata come buona pratica di accompagnare gli studenti a farsi una formazione specifica, ad approfondire, ad apprendere e anche incoraggiarli a diventare peer educator nelle altre classi, in altri contesti interni e esterni della scuola.
Va bene, grazie Raffaella. Adesso il gruppo di Giovanna Cipollari, velocemente. Chi parla? Giovanna? Giovanna non ha il microfono.
Teresa Rapis, parla Teresa Rapis.
Va bene, allora 5 minuti. Noi eravamo Giovanna, abbiamo sentito poi altre 3 colleghe e un collega, Marco, io non mi ricordo i cognomi, ma insomma li saprete voi. Giovanna ci ha fatto la prima domanda su cosa pensavamo, cosa ci era indicato di più. È stata una buona discussione, molto partecipata, c'è stato, io direi, un po' movimentista e mi è piaciuta molto. E abbiamo cercato di capire che cosa era interessante di quello che ha detto il collega Piotr Kowzan, non mi ricordo come si dice. Il tema riguarda la difficoltà di capire se era possibile il rapporto tra protesta e ruolo della scuola, quindi movimento degli studenti e ruolo della scuola. Io ho espresso un collegamento, io sono Teresa Lapis, ho espresso un collegamento tra traduzione, cosa poteva voler dire questa protesta degli studenti, in un rapporto di uno strumento didattico che in Italia chiamiamo service learning, e che secondo me, dalle mie esperienze di scambio e con scuole e con ragazzi negli ultimi 10 anni, c'è una traducibilità diversa. Anche recentemente in un corso che ho fatto della Scuola della Pace, service learning viene tradotto come cura. Invece, secondo me, nel mondo anglosassone lo traducono come interazione, servizio, tant'è che da quello che abbiamo sentito c'è un rapporto di promozione della protesta e quindi bisogna verificare qual è la traducibilità che ci va bene in quale scuola, perché deve riferirsi al contesto, cura o servizio. Poi c'è stato un intervento forte sulla separazione tra movimento di protesta e scuola, se la scuola sia o meno di appoggio, e quindi il ruolo della scuola come istituzione, come formazione sociale, nella quale sono stati espressi anche il rinvio al movimento delle donne, alla figura della studentessa come presenza femminile in questo ambito di interazione politica della scuola, come persona che in realtà non ha trovato la condivisione dei docenti. E abbiamo comunque come gruppo condiviso il fatto che spesso i docenti non possono, diciamo, parlare di politica, cioè promuovere quella interazione tra docenti e discenti che era possibile, non dico nel movimento 68, ma quando io avevo 14 anni, ma sicuramente nel movimento 77, negli anni successivi. Io ho cominciato a insegnare nel 93, si poteva parlare di politica. Io insegno diritto e economia e questo è stato possibile in molti livelli trasversalmente. Oggi è più difficile, nonostante sia più aperto il livello scuola, territorio, scuola e istituzioni. È stato anche promosso, Giovanna ha anche espresso la necessità della trasversalità e la necessità che si promuove il pensiero critico, perché una collega che mi sembra che si chiama, non mi ricordo come si chiama e mi scuso con lei, ha detto proprio che l'insegnante che promuove lo studente è anche quasi visto male dal contesto e dagli altri colleghi come uno che fa politica a scuola, e tutti abbiamo condiviso, sia Marco, tutto il gruppo, che fare politica a scuola vuol dire parlare della realtà. E Giovanni ha specificato che la realtà, la verità, due parole, concetti molto interessanti per lo sviluppo sostenibile, anche per il percorso di educazione civica, e bellezza e bontà, ma bisogna anche verificare i criteri del buono e del buono e del male, cioè una selezione che deve essere scelta e discussa, e che l'insegnamento deve essere un apprendimento. Il ruolo del docente è mettersi in gioco diversamente considerando che la presa in carico del pensiero critico va posto anche in una relazione di supporto degli studenti, non soltanto di promozione. Non c'è più il limite del programma e del programma che deve essere svolto, quindi come un adempimento, un compito autentico dei docenti, dobbiamo fare il programma, non c'è più, però per molti è un limite, e il movimento insegna un po' alla scuola che deve supportare i suoi studenti che possono esprimere anche il loro modo di prospettare il futuro. È un problema di metacognizione che per molta gente non è presa in carico, e quindi un senso della responsabilità e della presa in carico per un apprendimento come insegnamento e come comunità non soltanto educante ma anche apprendente. E quindi è una logica, un habitus mentale che va condiviso nei dialoghi tra saperi, e quindi la Sabina anche considera che ciò promuove un'alternativa nelle varie istituzioni, anche nell'economia, banca etica, il femminismo, la violenza. Abbiamo discusso su questo tema della violenza, e soprattutto ci siamo tutti detti una domanda che ho espresso e che non è stata risposta, cioè cosa intende aiutatemi, il confronto tra strategia della proposta e strategia dell'argomento. Vorremmo sapere, se è possibile, cosa ha inteso, perché tutti noi non abbiamo inteso in maniera adeguata o corretta o comunque coerente con quello che potrebbe essere un buon cambiamento. Non so se ho detto bene.
Grazie, sì. Grazie, passiamo, credo che il professore abbia appuntato questa richiesta, passiamo al gruppo di Fabrizio Leone. Io so che avete lavorato molto e che è molto bello per voi restituire, però io raccomando sempre i tempi, questo purtroppo è il mio ruolo molto antipatico. Fabrizio Leone, niente, no, mancherete.
Sì, io mi presento, Roberta Zaccagni, Fabrizio mi ha incaricato di relazionare, il nostro gruppo ha discusso in una bella maniera tutte le tematiche affrontate. Siamo partiti dall'immagine iniziale, quella del pesce, e ci siamo chiesti se l'interpretazione che ne abbiamo un po' dato, cioè quella del Covid, come il piccolo uno dei tanti problemi dell'ambiente, forse il più piccolo, se questa lettura sia quella corretta. Ecco, volevamo un po' conferma di questo. Dopodiché qualcuno di noi è rimasto perplesso e stupito di fronte a questo, no? Ragazzi al margine della democrazia indicano la via ai politici. Ma quando succede che ci disilludiamo così tanto? Quando accade che perdiamo la fiducia nell'agire nei confronti del mondo della politica? Abbiamo avuto noi qualche ruolo in questo? Dove stiamo sbagliando, se poi alla fine gli adulti questa fiducia la perdono? Ok? Una piccola provocazione per vedere in che modo davvero migliorare sempre il nostro lavoro. Dopodiché abbiamo anche ragionato sul legame con il discorso politica e democrazia. Ho fatto questa mattina, in fondo a parlare di movimenti e di attivismo è un po' raccontare ai ragazzi le diverse forme dell'agire politico, al di là del voto, del semplice voto, e quindi è un bel modo, comunque anche questo abbiamo apprezzato e condiviso il lavoro su questa tematica. E altra cosa, si è parlato nel lavoro del docente di creatività dei giovani di oggi. Qualcuno del gruppo non si ritrovava tanto in questa grande creatività che abbiamo visto nelle slide, perché percepisce dei giovani passivi, piuttosto spenti da questo punto di vista. E ci siamo chiesti, probabilmente è vero, molti sono spenti, molti sono da risvegliare da questo punto di vista. Come possiamo farlo? Abbiamo cercato di dare noi una risposta, ma chiediamo al professore questo come, se ha qualche suggerimento. Ci siamo chiesti, lavorando concretamente sull'ambiente, quindi con il lavoro fisico nei giardini o nei parchi della nostra città, guardando documentari, ci siamo detti qualche titolo, grazie a Fabrizio veramente, Antropocene e Domani, documentari suggeriti sulla tematica dell'ambiente, o anche utilizzando i concorsi, intesi con un'altra parola, con il CUM, concorrere insieme, quindi concorsi di classe nella quale tutti cercano di realizzare un qualche cosa che vada a produrre un risultato. Ma mille altri probabilmente possono essere le modalità con le quali stimolare la creatività dei ragazzi in questo senso, e chiediamo appunto al professore se ha qualche indicazione in merito. Spero di non aver dimenticato nulla. Ah, e un'altra cosa, qualcuno ha inteso, ma forse è stato un problema di percezione, non ci siamo spiegati un po' questa frase, educare alla violenza. E su questo chiediamo un attimo in che senso, se è stato detto così effettivamente o se è stato un problema di traduzione.
Va bene, grazie a voi. È ora la volta di Lucia Simi. Lucia?
Sì,
Eccoti.
arrivo, condivido un attimo lo schermo che ho preparato la sintesi, però mi dice che l'ospite ha disabilitato la condivisione.
No, dovrebbe essere attiva, controlla.
Sì, ecco, vado. Vedete la sintesi?
Sì.
Il foglio?
Sì.
Sì. Allora, un attimo solo. Scusate, un secondo. Allora, dunque il nostro gruppo era abbastanza eterogeneo per quanto riguarda la formazione degli insegnanti, in quanto poi apparteniamo a degli ordini di scuola differenti. E abbiamo sottolineato tutti l'importanza di voler recuperare il ruolo attivo degli studenti, in quanto abbiamo osservato degli atteggiamenti diversi da parte delle diverse fasce di età. Quindi i più piccoli erano sicuramente molto emozionati e molto più partecipi dei grandi, perché appunto i grandi l'hanno vissuta secondo noi più passivamente rispetto ai piccoli. E una citazione che ha fatto un nostro collega Daniele, ripresa da Susan Sontag nel saggio On Photography: si comincia a capire il mondo quando si inizia a dire no. Quindi questa partecipazione alla manifestazione è stato vissuto da molti studenti proprio come un rito collettivo, che stranamente è stato anche un rito un po' sui generis, in quanto non ha visto delle generazioni diverse in contrasto tra di loro, anzi ha visto la partecipazione di più generazioni che per la prima volta forse non erano in contrapposizione. E quindi ci siamo chiesti se forse è proprio da leggersi come una peculiarità questo. Altro punto appunto che abbiamo affrontato è come docenti, come abbiamo vissuto questa partecipazione alla manifestazione per il clima. Da molti è stata vista come una scissione, come quasi una schizofrenia, in quanto da una parte eravamo chiamati a far rispettare le regole, quindi prendere o non prendere le giustificazioni, oppure molti di noi hanno partecipato aderendo allo sciopero. Questo sempre proprio, come dicevo prima, proprio perché è stata una manifestazione sui generis che richiama l'attenzione di tante e diverse generazioni, perché anche al telegiornale hanno mostrato i nonni, no, che andavano a manifestare con i propri nipoti. Quindi ci siamo chiesti qual è il ruolo dell'insegnante, quindi che la didattica sicuramente non deve essere più fine a se stessa, ma formare le nuove generazioni verso tematiche che siano di grande attualità, recuperando fondamentalmente il ruolo attivo di tutti gli studenti, rendendoli quindi veri artefici della loro conoscenza e protagonisti all'interno del processo cognitivo. Pertanto è necessario anche una innovazione nelle metodologie didattiche. Inoltre un altro ruolo che l'insegnante deve assolvere è quello di creare degli anticorpi, cioè quello di saper suscitare un atteggiamento critico negli alunni rispetto a ciò che c'è di negativo nella società che li circonda, ma nello stesso tempo, quindi non solo quindi, andare verso la demolizione di ciò che non funziona, ma nello stesso tempo saper ricostruire e quindi saper anche imparare ad argomentare e a sostenere quello che i giovani stanno facendo. Sull'ultimo punto, cioè quello sull'educazione, quindi alla violenza, noi abbiamo sostenuto che educhiamo sempre con il nostro esempio e quindi in particolare una insegnante ha detto che è necessario educare con gesti di generosità, che è appunto forse una delle parole chiave anche del nuovo millennio. Ecco, questo è quello che è emerso nel nostro gruppo.
Qui ringrazio, adesso ho proprio 10 minuti di chiusura al professor Kowzan e poi una comunicazione di servizio e poi ci rivediamo domani.
Okay, thank you for your work. That was incredible. I have so many sheets of papers written right now. I will try to answer some questions. I will start from the easiest one. This question is I find the easiest. There was a question about creativity, how to increase the creativity in relation to the social movement protests. To the ecological protests. The most interesting thing when the protest is happening is that no one is going on the protest with empty-handed, or they shouldn't go with the empty hand. So there is peer pressure to produce something. Another thing is that when you are involved in activism, at the same time, the role of arts is growing immediately, because when you study arts, when you are involved in arts, it's much more, it's about individualism. It allows you to express yourself with colors, with singing. Singing as an important way to be creative. Producing songs is like, that should be something that is probably, it is something that we've lost probably a little bit because of the social media and the music that we received from the internet. But it would be great if students could produce something about themselves from their experience. And if you really want to, there are some ways to increase creativity. When people have too many tools, you should just limit their tools, saying that this is impossible, this is impossible, this is impossible, and then produce something within your limitations. About the preparing for the violence, learning for the violence, it was meant to be it would be good to prepare children or the youth to the wars. I mean, when you go to the demonstration, you should be ready, or some people on the street should be ready to de-escalate the tension between you and, for example, police, between you and other protesters, between you and some public that are against you. And these are very important psychological or social skills, to listen, to laugh, to intervene, and to stay calm whatever is happening around you. Also, it's also some the legal issue that are connected to the probability of being arrested is also important. But it was not preparing, it was not learning to be violent, but learning to avoid violence, or at least learning to survive violence in general, not to be like to decrease your vulnerability of the children in general. There were so many things. It was also interesting about the teachers, how to be involved but not to take over, how to support from off the stage the movement. And yeah, we know children, we know our children, and also there is some kind of responsibility to be as teachers, as work in public institutions. So it's a politics within the politics. I mean, we need to, but it's better not to be alone when we choose, because it's very inconvenient when we have one school and one teacher is kind of supporting openly, another is kind of stepping back. Maybe this diversity is a strength in a way, but it's better if we are somehow coordinated. I mentioned before something, the issue of teachers' unions, but it would be great to have somebody or other teachers to defend yourself if you make a mistake, for example, because we as teachers, we also make mistakes. Sometimes we say something and students react differently because we didn't expect some behavior to happen. And going outside, going to protest, going together with our students or letting them to go alone is a difficult issue, and it's better not to take a decisions alone on such issues. I'm protesting teachers. Okay, psychological. About deep adaptation, there was also a question about deep adaptation movement. I guess I may share because actually I was studying this the main paper, and then I looked at the movement, and at some point I gave up a little bit, but I can share screen with you for a moment, showing you the name of the
uno studio che annunciava la possibile fine dell'umanità.
The name of the author is Jem Bandel, and he published the paper Deep Adaptation, a Map for Navigating Climate Tragedy. And the important thing is that you have also Italian translation of this paper, Polish translation, Portuguese, and others are ongoing. This is a kind of fresh work, and you can find him on the internet. There are some actually he supports right now what he's doing. He supports intergenerational dialogue and spiritual preparation for bad scenarios which are not taken into consideration by the science, that are not articulated by the scientists, because we as scientists are kind of forced to produce on the optimistic results. I mean, we need to give politicians tools to decide about something, but maybe it's too complicated, and I try to make it short. So the main message that you get from the science and is transitioned to you from the media, from the main media, is rather optimistic. And when you look into the data by yourself, you are not that optimistic anymore. So his deep adaptation approach is kind of a movement from within the science. So I can only ask you to go deeper by yourself. But it's really interesting, and the interesting thing is this intergenerational approach. When people talk with their grandchildren and about climate change, and children, adult children who stay in the phase of denial, and they really work about that together. About the schooling, I just want to mention one thing about the going on to strike and having a day off. Much depends on the country. In some countries or in some regions, students really, maybe it sounds weird sometimes, but they really love to go to school, and they really are. They are, maybe especially after the pandemic or during the pandemic, they really miss the school, and it's not that easy to say to them that, okay, you have a day off. But like, why? I would like to meet my friends. And maybe it depends on the, from my experience in the Scandinavian countries, there are many schools and many school children who really love to, and it's difficult for them. It's difficult for adults even to talk to them about going on strike. But much depends on your context. So maybe, yeah, having a day off would be also in Poland something that students would be like to think about. I have like many issues from your feedback right now, but what I think is like that we are a little bit step ahead, step back from the reality, because we are discussing the movement that we are not sure if it still exists. I mean, we see something going on in media, but these are the avant-garde of the elite, let's say, the most skillful, those who survive with the families. I don't know if we go back to school if we see this engagement anymore. So maybe it was only just, you know, the 1 year of huge creativity, and we'll need to wait for something new to happen. And we are not sure if it will be about environmental issues. So saying that, I just want to say you good luck with the students, and see you tomorrow.